You know very well from my videos that I really enjoy board games that tell stories, board games with a strong narrative element. And a very common way that has been used in the past decades to create such stories through games is to use a paragraph-based system. The board is specially organized like boards of other games. So it's not a game book. The text is not there to provide a consistent world, a consistent space of the world. The fabric of the world is created by the board. But as players travel around the board, certain areas will unlock certain paragraphs that will be read from a book, and then different things happen. Some paragraph-based games organize each paragraph as a tree of decisions, as a mini choose-your-own-adventure book. Some other ones present your paragraph that is its own discrete unit of meaning without connections with others. Other ones give you a test in there, so there are different ways in which that can be handled. But paragraph-based system is a way of injecting a massive amount of narrative or storytelling into a board game. We have had a couple of those, actually many of those in the last decades, and to me it's pleasant and surprising that we still have those and they're still successful. They haven't been completely replaced by video games. The idea that you have to flip through the pages of a book to find the right paragraph and then, oh my gosh, even read it. I like that, and I like the fact that I'm not like a lonely lunatic that likes this, but there's an audience for this type of game. These games, when they are otherwise good, they are successful. They are not hindered by the fact that they are based on books that people have to flip through and read. So I'm happy for that. I have to say here the technology of the book, which is of course slower than if you press the button and a text appeared on a screen, actually helps to create a sense of suspense, precisely because the technology of the book is, in this case, is a non-trivial one. You have to flip through the pages and look for the right paragraph. It's not just proceeding linearly, and creates a moment of expectation, which to me really helps to build up the situation, builds up emotionally the stage in a much more interesting way than press, boom, here's the story. Something similar happens to me when I play the game Titan, the classic game where you move around the board, and then when a battle needs to be resolved, you move on a mini board representing the terrain. When you play it in person, it takes work to set up a new battle, and then to play it. So in some sense, it's less efficient. But precisely, there is a certain climatic sense that comes from that. There is even a build-up in the emotion that comes from the slow process of setting up that minigame. I played the computer version where you press a button and it resolves the battle, and I didn't like that at all. So it's more efficient, but doesn't mean more fun. All of this is to say that today we're going to talk about Agents of Smersh, which is a new, or a recent, I should say, implementation of this game mechanic of the paragraph-based game. This is clearly a game that aims at being narratively dense, at being all about the storytelling. The logo, the company, if you look closely, very small. There is a very small tagline in there that says board games that tell stories. This is definitely what this board game is about. It's about telling you a story. It is about the Cold War. It is about espionage in the Cold War, with the heroes performing actions that are greater than life. Greater than life. You have evil, cartoonish villains that have strange weapons and act in absolutely cartoonish and over-the-top ways. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Larger-than-life espionage during the Cold War is what you do when you want to have a James Bond movie, a James Bond game, without having to get in trouble by using the word James and Bond combined with one another in your game. So it's a James Bond type of game. It recreates a type of situation that you have in James Bond movies. And of all the James Bond movies, not the not the Daniel Craig ones, the Roger Moore ones, that is the campy ones. Some of the situations that you encounter in the book are definitely of the campy, or the campy flavor, of the campy variety of all the possible, maybe even Lazenby, of the various possible incarnations and variations of Bond that we have had. So let me tell you about Agents of Smersh and how Agents of Smersh works. A paragraph-based game which is fully cooperative, therefore can also be played solitaire, and that, as you will see, definitely is a game that has a material and aesthetic element which is very prominent. It's a very prominent part of the experience. Each player will play the role of a character that is represented by two main components. One, a token, a stand-up token that indicates the position of the character on the board. And then we have a character sheet with the special abilities and the numerical stats of that character. You will place white cubes on the card to indicate the current level of several of the stats, and then you move them back and forth to indicate the fluctuating value of your stats, for example, of your abilities. And the numbers that you see here, surrounded by a star symbol, indicate the starting stats for that character. So, for example, Callie starts with a spycraft of 0, but she's very persuasive and she has good deception, athletics, and hand-to-hand. Also here we have some other abilities, and here we have Resolve, which is a general currency that can be used to purchase extra bonuses such as extra dice, rerolls, extra movements, and things like that. So, what happens in a turn? First, in a turn you get to move. You can move up to 2 areas by land, following land connections, and you may use Resolve to move extra spaces. You may move along this railroad here, and then you can pop up in any location connected to the railroad. You can fly from an area that has an airport if you're starting from one such area to another area with an airport. That would be like a short flight, but it would be a legal one. So you can fly from airport to airport. You can also use a UN transport token, limited resource. Once you spend it, well, you have to find other ones or be without them, and spending a UN transport token allows you to move anywhere on the board, in any location on the board. If you're moving by these connections here and you enter an ocean area, then you have to stop there. You cannot keep moving. The idea being, I guess, that you are on a ship, and so it takes some time until you get to the other side of the ocean, which kind of makes sense. After you're done moving, then we get to the most interesting part of the game, of course, the heart of the game, which is the encounters. You will have to face encounters. The location where you are indicates the type of encounter that you have, but not the location per se, but rather whether or not the location has a token on them. There are 2 main types of tokens that will go on the board. One is the Intel token, this orange type of token with various symbols in the back, and one is the location token. Only 4 such tokens, each with an arch-villain with a henchman or the big bad guy on the back. And each henchman, well, we'll talk about the henchman later. So suppose that this is the situation. Right now my options are either to end my turn in an area that doesn't have a token, or an area with a yellow orange token. I'll also place a location token there. So first, areas without any tokens. I need to determine what's gonna happen to me there, what kind of encounter I'm going to face. Now, each continent has its own deck of encounters. You can see Asia, Africa, Europe, etc, etc. In this case, I will be using the Africa cards. I will draw a card from the Africa deck, and that card gives me a sense of the kind of story that I'm entering here. There's a story that has to do with double agents. Right now I don't know yet if I'm a double agent, if I'm trying to catch a double agent. I just know that there will be double agents. And I mind the number that will be used to construct the code indicating the encounter that I'm facing, and the response group D. The letter indicates the type of, the list of responses from which I can choose my own. You look at this player age and you look at the response group that corresponds to the letter just indicated. So here I know that in response to the double agent event that I will have to face, I could choose to do one of these things. It's still very nebulous because I don't know exactly what the danger is, so I can try to be strategic or tactical, but most likely I'll just go with, I don't know, I feel in my guts that I want to act innocent because that's just the kind of person I am, or that I feel like being in this sense, in this second here. And now I am marking, I'm noting the number corresponding to the action that I want to take. If I wanted to snoop around, I will make a note of 1, a mental note is enough. If I wanted to exchange G3, if I want to act innocent, 4, and so on and so forth. Finally, I draw a card from the Fate deck. This is used to generate various types of random events. And now I'm looking at the big colorful numbers in the center of the card. This is the number that I use if I'm resolving an encounter in a location that doesn't have an intel token. This would be the number that I would be using if there were intel, and this is the number that you always use when you're in an ocean location. So in this case, I have no intel there, so the number is 2. Now I need to put together the 3 numbers that I got here. So there would be 20 plus 4 because of the action that I selected there, and 2 from here. 20, 4, and 2. Then I pick up this phenomenally lengthy book and I look for the paragraph corresponding to my selection. That would be paragraph 20. Paragraph 20, as you can see, there's a section with paragraphs marked as 20. Then 20 and 4. And then the number, I don't remember, with no intel, that would be 2. 20, 4, and 2. Now, unless I'm playing solo, this book I'm not looking at directly during my turn. The next player is holding up the book and reading the story to me, so that I do not see what the pass and fail conditions for the present situation are. As you can see, well, you can stop, you can pause the video to read the story, but you can see it makes sense with the elements that we had here. A group of South African agents casually suggested you might work for them as a double agent. So now I know that they are trying to recruit me as a double agent, so double agent is potentially me. It has to do with South Africa. So it kind of makes sense with the story. The paragraph that you have here contributes to the story, to the atmosphere. That's really the heart of the game, which is to have fun following the story. But in any case, then, after the narrative element, you're brought back to the game aspect of the game, where you will have to take a test. These paragraphs all end with a test and with conditions to pass the test, and also with rewards or punishments based on whether you fail or pass the test. The test will be based on some of the skills that are here. For example, you can be told test spycraft or test persuasion, and sometimes you can choose between the two. When you pass a test, you will always roll this die here, and also you will, or you may roll, a number of dice out of this bag. This bag contains customized dice that have various effects and various combinations of successes and fails. Success symbols are the gun symbols. So for example, in this case, we have a die with 2 successes and 4 failures. This one is a better one because it gives us 3 successes and 3 failures. So you can see there are different combos. You always roll this one, so even if because of other game effects you cannot draw any dice from here, you always have at least 1 die. You always have at least a small chance of passing your test. The number of extra dice that you get to draw and then from the bag and then to roll during the test depends on your skills, on your stats. For example, if I'm trying to test for persuasion, my persuasion is 2, then I get to draw 2 dice randomly and I put them in the pool of dice that I will roll to pass the test. But many tests have modifications such as test persuasion -1. Then I simply reduce my present value by 1. There may be other things that give an advantage. For example, well, you can take testing persuasion -1, or testing deception without penalties, but then you have an extra number of successes. Unless otherwise specified, a single success is enough to pass a test. There may also be cases where a test has a special condition that says if you have a certain special ability, then you pass the test automatically. Those abilities, actually, they're called advanced skills in the game. They're represented by these tokens. You will acquire the tokens during the game and you spend them when the situation applies. These represent advanced skills such as gambling, luck, speed, disguise, lockpicking, electronics, adventuring, and we use weapons and so on and so forth. So you may have tests that will tell you, after telling you the ability, the skill that you're testing, they'll tell you, but pass automatically if you have, say, weapons use. So, and then after I look at the number of dice that I would receive, I may also choose to spend resolve to get an extra die. So between game effects, my personal stats, possibly spending resolves, I will end up with a pool of dice. I roll them. And then if I have at least one such symbol, I pass. I may also produce injury effects, in which case I take an injury token and I place it on my character's card. And if the number of injuries is equal to or higher than the number of life points that I have, well, that's pretty bad. I don't die, but pretty much I'm knocked out, and the evil people get time to do a lot of bad stuff in the meanwhile. I'll talk about that in a sec. But suppose I do pass the test, then hooray, I passed the test. Did I fail? Oh, too bad, I failed the test. Either way, it is the rule book that will tell me the effects that apply when you pass or fail. As you can see, a lot of paragraphs, a lot of different effects. You may gain tokens, lose tokens, gain certain advantages, gain conditions. There are a lot of conditions that you may receive, and they're represented by these cards. Some are good, some are bad. You simply get the card that represents lasting conditions that will affect your character in one of many possible ways. And this is one way that adds a lot of chrome and flavor and story to the game. So I will pass or fail the test. Now, this is what happens when we are taking a test, well, we're resolving an encounter in a location that doesn't have intel. Suppose I'm in a location that does have one of those orange intels, then I need to choose between two things. I may take the intel, retrieve it, and put it in my intel pool. There's an area on the board where you can place intel pools. You're collecting these intel tokens. Incidentally, the back is important, but you're not allowed to look at the back yet. After I take that and I add it to my pool, I resolve the encounter normally. So a card from the continent-specific deck, a number from the action I select, and a random number from the fate card, but now I'm looking at the random number with intel instead of the one with no intel. And usually these numbers will generate tougher encounters, harder encounters, and harder tests to beat. I may also choose, instead of taking this intel, to discard it and to replace it with a location. And in that case, the placement of the location token is randomly generated. I draw a card here. I look at the place. These cards are also used to generate random locations. And I place the location token that I exchange from this in the random location. So basically, intel may represent information about the activities of the bad guy, and you put them here so you know how to face what the bad guy is doing, or information about the location of the bad guy. If I end up my turn, my action phase, in an area with a green marker, then that's a different story. Instead of a regular encounter, what the marker represents is one of the henchmen of the bad guy. Then I flip the token face up and I face the corresponding henchman. There are 4 possible henchmen that you're facing: Pierre, Darling, Mr. Big, and Fyodor Maximov. And they have different tests depending on the levels they are at. Some start at level 1, some at higher levels, depending on the scenario that you're playing and depending on the number of players that you have. There's a token that indicates the current level of the character.
So you simply have to pass a test. When you're facing a henchman, you have to pass a test for that henchman at the level that the henchman is at presently. Suppose I'm encountering this guy here at level 1, then I need to take a persuasion test, and simply I implement the result here. If I fail the test in the encounter with the henchman, I suffer the negative effects. If I do pass it, I get the reward for passing the test, and also I get something else. I get a point in the location intelligence track. So basically, by defeating the henchman, I'm getting information about the location of the big bad guy. So every time that I defeat one of the henchmen, well, the henchman actually gains a level, so they become harder after a while, but also I gain a point on that track. In order to win the game, I need to get a number of location intelligence points that, well, it is based on the number of players. So, for example, with 4 players, well, with 2 players, I need 4 location intelligence points. So basically I need to locate the bad guy, but remember, I'm also collecting intelligence for the other pool, because not only do I need to locate the guy, and that is represented by the location intelligence points, but also I need to have the right tools to defeat the bad guy. I mentioned that it's bad when you quote-unquote die, that is when your injuries match or exceed your number of health points. Yes, that is bad, because when that happens, yes, you immediately remove all the injury tokens for your character, so you're immediately healed, but also at the same time, the character, the villain, advances. So the spawn here advances on this track, indicating the fact that the plans, the plots of the bad guy, the big villain, intensify, and he's getting closer and closer to destroy the world, or whatever it is the super villains do in this case. To resolve this, you will draw a card from here, and that will tell you how many spaces the villain advances on this track. At the end of your turn, once you're done resolving your travels and your encounters, you draw a card from this deck here, and you resolve the end of turn events. Airports will tend to close. You simply place a token on them, then the location cannot be used as an airport anymore, and then you will have other indications about intel that needs to be added or removed from the board. So intel is a very fluctuating thing, that very fleeting element in the game that comes and goes, pops up on the map, and maybe stays there for a while, and maybe disappears immediately because it's brought in by one card, removed by the next. So how does the game end? If you win, you do so by finding the correct a sufficient number of location intelligence points to identify the location of the bad guy. And once that is the case, the game ends immediately, or we should say the final confrontation starts when you grab all of the tokens, intel tokens that you have in your intel pool. And then, for the first time in the game, you're allowed to place the tokens face up, and you need to produce the corresponding number of icons here. So in this case, if the game ended, I found the bad guy, and the bad guy is here. To defeat the bad guy, I need a blue icon, a green icon, and another blue icon, and I don't have that. So I need to collect a lot of these tokens to make sure that I have the right weapons. In case the tokens are all face down, as I said, usually they're face down. They're in reality game effects that allow you to look at them. But the point is I need to collect both. I need to sometimes exchange these tokens for location points so I can locate the bad guy, but I also need to collect some intelligence tokens per se and have a good pool, because at the end of the game I need to produce the right ones. I win the game if I'm able to locate the bad guy and produce the necessary icons to defeat the bad guy. As you can see, the more times, the more often I've been defeated during the game, then the lower is the position of this guy on the track, then the tougher it is for me to defeat the bad guy.
not for everybody. There are things in this game that definitely are not for everybody. I see how this game can be divisive in a way, can be easily quote unquote misunderstood, or end up in the hands of players that will not enjoy. Before we talk about the controversial aspects, let's talk about things that probably are more objective, or at least that more players will tend to agree on. Of course, as soon as I say that, people say, I don't agree with that, and that's fine. The rules could have been done better. There are gray areas. There are parts of the text where I wasn't clear if I was reading an example of a rule or the rule itself. Information sometimes seems to be, information is relevant seems to blend into the text of examples. And sometimes, again, the rules seem to exemplify without telling you that they made the transition. The important pieces of information that are not visually emphasized, but they're buried into blocks of text. And then there are just things that seem to be taken for granted. They are not spelled out explicitly. For gamers that have a certain gamer's wisdom, they know certain norms, traditions, and rituals of modern board gaming culture, they can figure them out. But I think it simply would have been better to have a rule book that left less to the imagination and made things more obvious and more and clearer. And then some will comment, this is the best rule book ever. Again, good for you. I simply found the book to be slightly out of focus, just like a slightly blurred picture. I could still figure out what was going on, but I had to put more effort than I would have liked to. But things that I think most players, most people will enjoy is simply the material aspect of the game. This is clearly a game that is produced with the aesthetic element in mind, with an appreciation for the aesthetic elements that components contribute to the experience of playing the game. Large number of components, large board, everything looks very colorful. The art looks, I think the art does has a good balance there between the detailed and colorful and the slightly caricatural aspect of this. Not entirely realistic, but again, with a little bit of the cartoonish elements that brings you into the Roger Moore era of James Bond movies of the past. So it's just a joy in moving around that large board, shuffling those cards, and going through and using the material components, of course. And they had this gorgeous and very impressive book of encounters, which again technically is inefficient. Technically. You would not need it. There would be probably more efficient ways of doing that digitally, but there is a joy of its own. It's a specific type of connection with the experience of of being there in that moment that comes from using this big massive book. There's a certain sense of awe that comes from seeing that book with all those paragraphs, with feeling how heavy it is. When you have a digital text and you don't get that sense of how long or big or large the text is, the advantages and disadvantages. If that digital text is allowing you to explore a dungeon, then the good thing is that you do not know how big the dungeon is. Maybe immense, maybe very small. With a game book, you get a sense of how much you read of that book, and so you get a good sense of how much must be left. Here you immediately... On the other hand, precisely because of this, you don't have that sense of awe about the possibilities, because you do not know if those digital texts have other possibilities or not. Here, immediately the book, wow, promises you a wealth, an endless, bottomless well of adventures, and that's precisely what happens. This is a very massive book. And again, there is a certain physical component in moving around. You also do good exercise when you pass around this rulebook, but definitely there is a certain charm that comes from that book, so full of adventures, characters, situation, challenges, and so on and so forth. About things that will be more controversial, maybe, of course, the things that make this game very strong for some people are the things that some other people will dislike. The major element, which comes, by the way, right from Tales of the Arabian Nights. If you played that game in the 80s, on in one of the new incarnations, you know what I'm talking about. That game is massively random, and so is Agents of Smersh. It's very hard to play well. It's very hard to make tactically informed, strategically sound decisions, because you had to react to random elements But you have to react to random elements, yes, and also to elements that do not give you nearly enough information for you to be able to make an informed decision, an educated guess, a guess that would really increase your chances of passing a test. Sometimes it does, but in most cases you just go with your guts. When there is a card that says torture and you do not know if you're the person that is going to be tortured or you are going to supervise a torture and decide if that's acceptable or not. Car chase and you don't know if you're the one doing the chase, if you are the one that is being chased, if you are getting on the scene when one of your friends is in a car chase, then simply figuring out which is the right reaction, which is the best reaction is impossible. So you have to let it go, don't keep it inside you anymore. You simply go with your guts and you enjoy the randomness, you enjoy the chaos that comes out of this. At the end, the tests are random too, but at least you are spending resources. But you have to enjoy the story. This again, if you read the comments of people that complain, but this is too random a game, there isn't much of a game, and you will see that the defenders of the game say, yep, I agree, it's not much of a game in the tradition of chess or checkers, but it is an interesting experience as a storytelling engine. This is what the game is about. It is about creating stories together. It is about creating interesting chains of events and enjoying the narrative. This is a triumph of the idea of board games that tell stories rather than board games that are ludologically sound and they give you airtight systems of rules. This is one of the reasons why it's very hard to say, are games stories or abstract systems where the theme doesn't matter much. In some games, the abstract system is what really matters. In this game here, every mechanics is devoted to the creation of an immersive, exciting, fun, and sometimes crazy story. This being said, there are different scenarios, different settings where this kind of philosophy may work in different ways. In Tales of the Arabian Nights, the complete randomness in which you are thrown, that you may end up on a flying carpet that transports you to another place and you turn into a strange animal, then you get married, then you encounter a witch, then you encounter pirates, and the craziest things happen. Somehow in that setting, it makes perfect sense because that is a world of magic, of wonder, where human beings are part of a chaotic universe that they do not control. When we transfer that philosophy of complete randomness to the Cold War and to the modern world, then all of a sudden something strange starts happening because the modern world in which we live is a world where we like to have a certain degree of agency. We are told actually that we have a degree of agency. Ideas such as the American dream, for example, or modern optimism, individualism relies on the idea that you work hard, you make the right decisions, and those pay off. It's just to say that we live, at least in Western modern society, in a society that gives us a description of the world in which what we do matters, and good actions tend to be rewarded by positive results and vice versa. So actually there is simply a little bit of a clash here between the mechanics, which seem to be really magic mechanics of a pre-modern world, and a very modern, a very goal-oriented, a very quote-unquote meritocratic system. I would say meritocratic modern vision of the world, which is the one of the James Bond movies, where James Bond doesn't just happen to win the day. It's not completely at the mercy of the universe and it just always happens to win. He works hard, he resists torture, he's devoted, he's strong, etc., etc., etc. He deserves to be the hero that wins against the evil guy, and in the end, in the movies and in the novels too, of course, triumphs. So I nothing else. I love, I can't stress that enough, the storytelling element of the game. I love board games that tell stories. It does feel that there is a little bit of a gap here between the implications of the mechanics and the way they bring the theme to life. So you do have to play the role of these modern spies as if you were Simba the Sailor, as if you were Aladdin, as if you were one of those pre-modern magical characters. Do not worry, do not overthinking. Again, just immerse yourself into the chaotic, stormy ocean of the stories that can emerge from this game, and definitely this is an enjoyable experience. So, not for everybody, in the sense that definitely if you're looking for a tight gamey game that rewards good play, then there may be a problem here. This is definitely not a game for you. Great game for those who enjoy storytelling games, but even those they have to, I believe, embrace a representation of the theme, Cold War espionage, in an heroic or even super heroic fashion. They have to embrace a vision of that theme which is different from what we usually see, which is almost like a magical, pre-modern, heavily random-based vision. In that sense, this is definitely not for everybody, not for the gamists of us, the gamists among the board gamers, and not even for those that are devoted to the espionage genre and that are not willing to reconsider some of the assumptions about the genre and to see a representation of the genre which is very different from most other ones. So, Agents of Smersh, I personally liked it very much. I think I forgot to mention that in all of my theoretical considerations. I liked it very much, even though I had myself to go past the strange feeling of playing a spy that is challenged with what appeared to be rational choices and puzzles, but was challenged in a way that actually had nothing to do with puzzles and riddles, but had to do with dealing with magical, uncontrollable forces of nature. Other than that, when I made that step, when I was able to embrace the philosophy of the game, but I definitely enjoyed seeing the stories that the game that can create, the crazy situations, the narratives. The encounter book does a very good job of setting up scenes and creating fun, exciting situations. And once I started enjoying what each scene was bringing, then I simply stopped worrying and I was able to enjoy the story and what the game has to offer, which is a lot. But it's a very specific type of pleasure. It's a very specific type of enjoyment that the game has to offer. But it's a good one. If you, quote-unquote, are in the right mindset, definitely is a game that has a lot to offer and can be a lot of fun.